Hello and welcome to the Herdline Podcast, hosted by Trace Johnson and the Herds Headset. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode where the Headset and Trace talk all things Marshall athletics. Be sure to follow us on X and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Now, sit back, relax, and let's talk the herd.
Welcome back to the Herdline Podcast. Trace and the Herds Headset with you as we are ready to start a little bit of a different, well, we've been doing things kind of similar to this as far as going back and looking at previous Marshall related things like coaches. We've done coaches for football and men's basketball. And today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than that. We're going to be looking at an individual season. This isn't going to be something that that we're able to do like as consistently as that, because I mean, football season's close and we're going to be spending a lot more time talking about that. We have some preview episodes and stuff lined up. You know, we're going to really dive into football season 2026. But for right now, we're going to do an episode where we're looking back at a season from Marshall football that's been very near and dear to both of our hearts. The 2002 football season, we're going to really dive into that. One of the most iconic, legendary seasons in Marshall football history for a lot of different reasons. And we're going to sink our teeth into that today. As a little disclaimer, if y'all hear a lot of loud, heavy machinery in the background of my mic, it's because there's a very good chance that they might be out in my yard right now trying to clean up trees that have been at my tree that got split in two different ways. They're trying to clean it up because of the storms. So if you hear that, just ignore it. It's not normal, but I'll try to keep my mic muted as much as I can. But before we get started here, how's it going for you, man?
Going good, dude. And man, that's crazy storms that came through here this week. I mean, at the time of the recording, anybody that lives in West Virginia, you will have known that we got a little bit of rain, and that little bit of rain has done a lot of things. But you know, all is well. I'm safe over on my end, and I'm getting ready to talk about my favorite college football season at Marshall football in all of history. And was it the most successful? No, it wasn't. Was it? You know, the season where we had a bunch of Heisman finalists? No, it wasn't. But just me personally, and I know that you have very similar sentiment to it as well. This is just a really, really fun season, and I can't wait to talk about it because, it's going to come up. Let's go ahead and just kind of address the elephant in the room. My favorite movie of all time is Running with the Herd. The 2002 Thundering Herd football team, and I'm telling you, I had that as a kid. In fact, I have it still. I'm looking at the DVD right now, but I played it so much that it was scratched to death, and so I found it whenever I was moving a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is great! I can't wait to pop this in and watch this. This is literally my favorite movie, and it would play like the first 5 minutes, and like at the halftime of the first game against App State, like it would just start spazzing out, and then it got all the way to like midway for like 30 seconds, and then it just went blue screen on me. So It's like really tragic because I wanted to watch this movie for literally, I don't know, years of my life. And Trace, you have this, and you've been incredibly greedy. I'm just going to be honest because, I mean, I've been trying to get you to burn me a copy, do something illegal for me, but you're just trying to be a law-abiding citizen, and it's annoying. I'm going to be honest with you. Yeah, but I can't wait to talk about this year in all sincerity, because this is the year that made me fall in love with Marshall football. Now, this is why I am a Marshall fan. This is why I follow the team the way that I do. It's just because of what this team was able to accomplish. And so let's get into it. Let's talk about a great season for Marshall.
Yeah, I'm glad you started with Running with the Herd, because I knew that was definitely going to get brought up for sure. I originally got that on VHS for Christmas. I mean, it didn't come out in 2002 because it was still fresh and probably in production, but it came out, I guess, the next year, 2003. I got it for Christmas that year on VHS. Greatest gift ever, greatest gift ever. And then about, I don't know, a decade or more than a decade, a little over a decade ago, I ended up getting it burned onto. My mom got it made. She sent it to CVS Pharmacy, and they sent it off the VHS and brought it and got the DVD version of it for me. So I was like, well, that'll work. I'll have a couple copies. And I have tried a lot of times actually to try to put that DVD over onto my laptop. It just does not have it. And you used to be able to go onto like a certain website that it had listed that you could like find the files online. It's like gone. I guess it's so old that it's gone or whatever, like from CBS. So I will, if there's a will, there's a way. I'll find a way. It's just to get you that copy. It's just a matter of time, however I can figure it out. But it's been challenging for sure. But yeah, this season is pretty iconic. I mean, it just is. You talked about a lot of those things. Not having. It wasn't like the most that we've had. Few seasons that have been better in terms of overall wins, but this one's very, very memorable. And, I figured it would be kind of a good way to kind of start would kind of be to tell our individual stories about this season. And I think we've kind of touched on that a little bit already. But as far as me on my side goes, I was in the third grade in 2002. And at this point, I was not a sports guy at all. I had no knowledge of sports at all. I had no interest, no care at all. And my third grade teacher, who we're still, family friends with to this day, her son at the time was a senior on the equipment staff for Marshall. And that was my introduction to Marshall. Her influence, that was how it started. And it just kind of just grew from there. I remember he used to give me a lot of cool stuff that that stuff they would get extras, like clothes even, and like different things like that, like programs and different stuff. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And then that just happened to be a great time to get started because you got Leftwich as a senior who was very thick in the Heisman race, very thick in, top quarterback possibly being taken in the NFL draft the next year. It was just a lot of hype around Marshall that year. And that season just really played out really well. So that's kind of how it started for me. If you want to get into any specific details about your journey there, you can go ahead and do that too.
Well, I was about 5 years old when all of this was going down. I was in kindergarten, and my dad has always been a huge Marshall fan. I think I'd been to a couple of games before, but this was really the year that I would go to a game and stay the entire time. Now, was I paying attention? Probably not. It really wasn't until 2005, 6 that I really started to be like, okay, I care about the outcome of the game. But again, the reason why this season is just so iconic is because of that just little DVD that somebody maybe at the athletic department thought about doing and said, this would be cool. They had no idea what they were doing. I mean, it made me a lifelong fan. And I watched this over and over and over and over again to the point where my parents were really getting annoyed. And I can remember one time, because my mom, she's not a sports person. She doesn't watch anything like that at all. And if you remember in the video, I mean, they show clips from practices, and they got some of the coaches there, chewing out the players, and they bleep out the cuss words and whatnot. And my mom would get mad. I mean, she's like, "Hey, you need to stop watching that because I don't want. You're 5 years old. You don't need to be watching that stuff." And Dad was always like, "Well, it's how coaches talk," and so it was funny, but. Overall, though, this is just a great season because, and really, this would be the final season where they would see a lot of success. Marshall would see a lot of success for a while. So, again, I love this year. I know a lot about this year, and it's the first time that I ever really became invested in Marshall athletics of any kind.
Yeah, me too. Same exact thing here for me. I'm glad you mentioned that actually about the fact that this was their last 10-win plus season it would be their last one for 11 years. It would be their last conference championship for 12 years. So, I mean, it was definitely a hot minute before they had that caliber of a success, moving forward. So it was something definitely to savor, especially as a young fan at that point. I'm fresh into football, being a fan, fresh into being a Marshall fan. That was you couldn't ask for really a better introduction. I mean, unless you were there in 99 or something, you couldn't get a whole lot better than that. Maybe, I would have obviously, I kind of a little bit salty that I didn't get to experience the GMAC Bowl from the year before with the big comeback. But you know what? I have no regrets about how I started out as a Marshall fan. That's for sure. So, but I just wanted to start with that because I feel like that's another reason why we picked this season to start with, is because it's very, very sentimental to both of us. So that was something I had to start with. But before we get into the ins and outs of this season, I feel like we got to briefly touch on the season before, because the 2001 season was very good as well. They go 11-2 overall. They win the GMAC Bowl over East Carolina, like we talked about, one of the greatest comeback wins in bowl season history. Everybody knows that. One of the greatest bowl games of all time. Marshall wins the MAC East division that year, which was just a reoccurring. It was every year. However, they did not win the MAC championship for the first time since they rejoined the MAC. They have to go on the road at Toledo that year, and Marshall opens up like a 20-23 lead, 20-0, something like that, and Toledo comes back on them, beats them 41-36 with Chester Taylor and all that. I mean, Toledo was a good team back in those days, and Marshall had a big lead on them, and they let it slip. So that was, disappointing, because that would have been 5 straight MAC championships. They had 4 before that. So, but despite that, you still have an 11-win season with a bowl win, and they actually finished number 21 in the final coaches poll. They were not ranked in the final AP poll, but they were ranked in the final coaches poll. So a lot of hype heading into 2002. A lot of hype. 9 returning starters offensively, 6 returning starters defensively. They did lose a few key guys from the defense, especially Maxie Yates, Michael Owens, Ralph Street. Those are all really big playmakers. I mean, Maxie Yates was the MAC Defensive Player of the Year in 2001. But there was enough talent back, especially offensively, where you knew they were going to be something special. This was Leftwich as a senior. He could have left. He could have went to the NFL after 2001. He didn't. Marshall, because in large part because of the hype around Leftwich as a Heisman candidate, Marshall's preseason number 19 in the AP poll. That just doesn't happen. I mean, that's never happened. So that was huge stuff. I mean, you're starting the year in the top 20 before even the first game's played. It's big. So looking at the first game of 2002 on August 31st, 2002 against Appalachian State. This is when App State was still in the FCS 1AA ranks. And at this point, I believe they were actually ranked coming into the season. They were actually ranked number 2 in the 1AA polls. So that was a good team. And Marshall gets a really nice win, 50-17. It was a little close there for about 2.5 quarters. It was pretty competitive there. App State, I mean, they're never a pushover, obviously. And I think like midway through the third quarter, Marshall was only up 6, but then after that, they just turned it on big time. Leftwich goes 27-41 for 469 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks. That'll work. I mean, that'll do. Josh Davis, 11 receptions, 264 yards, and a touchdown. The receivers this year, I mean, obviously we got a quarterback that good. The receivers are going to be excellent as well, but they were absolutely lethal. I mean, great, really good start there. At home, want to get up on the right foot, which they did. And that led to a huge game week 2 on a Thursday night, September the 12th, on the road. Marshall at this point is number 16 in the country. They're going on the road at Lane Stadium down to Blacksburg to play number 11 Virginia Tech. I think they were either number 11 or number 9, but what I looked up said they were number 11. But regardless, really good team. And this was a hyped game. Everybody was watching this. I mean, this was a big deal. Unfortunately, Marshall does not have the best performance. They lose 47-21. Did not really work out well for him at all. But Byron puts up his numbers again, 31 out of 49, 406 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. I mean, that's against a very good Big East team at that point. What really killed Marshall in this game, 2 aspects, turnovers and run defense. Killed them in this game. Kevin Jones for Virginia Tech rushes for 171 yards and 3 touchdowns. Lee Suggs for Virginia Tech rushes for 153 yards and 2 touchdowns. Virginia Tech as a team, 395 yards rushing. I mean, you're just not going to win many games. Granted, the passing attack wasn't very potent for the Hokies, but when you're running for almost 400 yards, you don't really need it. And then Marshall had 3 turnovers to Tech's none. So, I mean, you're giving up 400 yards rushing and you're -3 in turnover margin, you're going to lose. It's just the way it is. So, disappointing performance, but, Byron still did his thing, and I think but at that point he was a surefire guy that was going to get to New York, barring any injury, which obviously is a little bit of a later topic. And the third game of the year was a big one as well. This is another weeknight game, a Friday night game, September 20th against UCF. This was UCF's first year in the MAC. I mean, they hadn't even been an FBS program very long. And there was a lot of hype around this game as well because UCF was talking some stuff about the Herd, and they really wanted the smoke in this game. And that was very well documented in the run-in with the Herd DVD. I mean, they were very, very brash and, whatever. And obviously it's worked for them. Look where they are now. But at this time, Marshall was the top dog. UCF was coming in, doing a lot of talking. And Marshall wanted this one bad, and it was a good game. The whole entire game was good. I mean, it was close. Marshall did open up I think it was like a 12-point lead in the second half, but UCF never went away. But Marshall does get the win, 26-21. Really good game. I mean, that was definitely the most competitive one, equal kind of competition game they've had up to that point. Looking at Leftwich's numbers, he did have a really solid game, 28 out of 49, 340 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a little bit uncharacteristic there. UCF, Alex Haynes, running back, has 131 yards and 2 touchdowns overall, scrimmage touchdowns, 1 on the ground, 1 through the air. Brandon Carey from Marshall, running back, had a big game, 142 yards and a touchdown. Really good game. Josh Davis has 6 catches for 87 yards and 2 touchdowns. JT Rimbert and Terrence Tarpley on defense both have 1 interception each. And Tarpley's interception at the end was the one that sealed the game. So really good performance overall there. There's no question. But there's definitely, at this point, through 3 games, you can definitely tell there's an issue with run defense. And that's you're gonna hear a lot more about that as these games progress. But talk about those first 3 games a little bit. What stands out to you about those?
Well, you mentioned it against App State. Got off to a real hot start there because App State was definitely and has never been a pushover program. They've always been very talented. And if I can recall correctly, the first ever play of that 2002 season was a 99-yard kick return for a touchdown for Marshall that got called back.
Yeah.
So, like you said, the first half, it was kind of a tough sledding. Took them a little bit to get things moving, but whenever Leftwich finally got in the groove, it was on from there. It was no problem. So then you move into that Virginia Tech week, and quite honestly, at the time, that was probably the biggest game in all of Marshall football history in that moment. Virginia Tech's not a far away place to go to. This is easy place for Marshall fans to travel. Marshall's ranked. They're ranked. This is like the last couple of seasons, Marshall was able to get some real big wins against stellar road opponents, Clemson and South Carolina both respectfully. And so this was a game where I think a lot of us Marshall fans were going into it like, you know what? I think that this is going to be a program-defining win. Like, we are not just the team that is able to upset some – power teams whenever they're having down years, but we're ranked, we were ranked in the preseason, and we are hoping to go in there and compete with another ranked program that is, a heavy hitter and come out with a win. That was the expectation, that was the hope, and that was the goal. And sadly, they just weren't able to get it done. Those 2 running backs for Virginia Tech that you mentioned, they were just talk about just a 2-headed dragon. I mean, there was not much stopping either one of them. They could have done whatever they wanted to all night long. And even though Leftwich had a good game, I mean, really, if you were to tell me that, Marshall would have put up 21 points on Virginia Tech, that would have been ranked. I mean, during the game, they may not have won, but I would have thought it would have been at least like 21-28, something along those lines. But to lose 47-21, that's a lot. And, the depth was definitely a huge difference in that game. Marshall just didn't have enough guys. And, that's just any problem with any smaller school. You don't have the same type of depth that these bigger schools have. So, tragically, they weren't able to get that huge win that they were hoping for. But still, everything that the season, they had started the season with was in front of them. The MAC championship, once again, was right there. Bowl berth and whatnot was right there too. And as you mentioned, you go into the UCF game, And this is a big one. Even though UCF had started off 0-2 on the season, they were still known to be a very good team. And a lot of the experts back in those days were basically telling us that, man, they're going to win the entire MAC conference. I mean, Marshall, they were able to do what they did, but UCF is better than them. And like you said, the documentary really depicted it well. Lots of smack talk. They basically said, we think that we have been able to crack the code on Byron, and we're going to be able to shut him down. Our corners are going to give them fits, and we're going to run the ball. We're going to throw the ball, do whatever we want against this defense. And so that something that you gotta love about Pruitt is this. He made sure that whenever somebody was going to talk some smack, that he let his team know about it. And he was like, guys, these fellows are basically saying all this stuff. They're telling it to the newspaper. Like they're not saying this behind closed doors, but they're saying this in like the press conference. And so they're coming to our house on a nationally televised game, and what I believe was even under a full moon, if I can recall correctly. And they're going to be talking all this junk. So it's either time to put up or shut up. I know that we didn't win against Virginia Tech, but that's in the back mirror. And now it's time to move forward. It's time to be able to finish this season strong. And it was a great game. I mean, back and forth and back and forth. And you mentioned this a moment ago, but the savior of this game for Marshall was definitely number 8, Brandon Carey. He's your backup running back, and they basically were able to shut down Franklin Wallace pretty well the entire game. He didn't really get a whole lot going, 12 yards total on 6 attempts. But I don't know. They did not have any answer for Carey. Carey was more of an elusive running back and was able to make some things happen with his feet, more so than Wallace, who was more of a physical running back. So he just ran all over him and was able to get Marshall in really good positions to score. And even scoring his own self. So, it was a great game. I believe it was Chris Crocker who got the interception there at the end of the game. I don't remember you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you can recall that. But I think it was Chris Crocker who snagged that last interception that kind of sealed it for Marshall. And just like that, Marshall went from the devastation of losing the biggest game in its history, now kind of right back in the driver's seat. You just beat the other front runner in the MAC, and the rest of the season, it's wide open. It's looking good, and I think everything was kind of getting back into perspective for the team, because let's face it, the rest of the schedule on paper, they weren't even in the same class as Marshall. They just weren't, and we're going to talk about these games and see it. Even though we see a couple that have some really talented players individually that would go on to the NFL. In fact, this next game would be one of those cases that we're going to talk about. But still, yeah, they just weren't as a team in the same class as Marshall.
No, they were not. And that UCF game, it's kind of funny because at least to my knowledge, at least in my own brain, that is the first Marshall game I can vividly ever remember watching. And I wasn't there at that game, but that's the first one I can remember actually watching. So just a cool little side note there. But yeah, that was a really good performance. That was the game they had to have. I mean, if you can't afford to go lose 2 straight there, especially at home like that against a team that's been talking smack, you got to take care of them. So they did a good job. So the 4th game of the year, they go on the road. They're at Kent State. This is October the 5th. And this was a pretty competitive game for a while, kind of like that App State game was, like for about 2.5 quarters, It was a close game. I think Marshall was only up 7 at the half, and Kent State actually tied it in the 3rd quarter. But then Marshall ends the game ends the game with 3 unanswered touchdowns. They win 42-21. Byron Leftwich with a really big game, 31 out of 45 for 377 yards, 2 touchdowns. Again, 2 interceptions. So actually, between this game and the UCF game, that's nearly half of his interceptions for the entire season just in those 2 games. So kind of interesting there. Franklin Wallace, like you mentioned from the last game, didn't do a whole lot. Well, he does a lot in this game. Butchie, as always refer to him as, Butchie Wallace rushes for 149 yards and a touchdown. And one of those guys that you talked about, Kent State not being a very good team, they had a superstar in the making, and Josh Cribbs. I mean, this guy He was a quarterback, but let's be honest, he was really more of a running back at quarterback. He rushes for 199 yards and 3 touchdowns against Marshall. And this is a guy that was going to do big things in the NFL for a long time. Josh Cribbs was a constant factor in the NFL. So the MAC in this era was producing NFL talent everywhere, even at schools that weren't very good. They had a lot of talent, spread out over these schools. So good win for the Herd, 645 total yards, very impressive. Roberto Terrell, 1 interception. Deontay Wilson, a linebacker, 1 interception. So good, well-rounded game there for the Herd, despite a little bit of a slower start again, but they do take care of business. Get another conference win. Can't ask for more than that. Looking at the next game at home against Buffalo the next week on October the 12th, this was going to be a complete massacre from the start, and that's what it turns out to be. Marshall wins 66-21. They were up 52-0 at the half. I mean, what more needs to be said than that? Byron in just 2 quarters of football, 28 out of 35, 447 yards, 4 touchdowns and no interceptions in 1 half. I mean, that is unfair, is what that is. I mean, and then the second half, Stan Hill ends up playing a lot. I mean, obviously it was all backups, all reserve guys. Wilbur Hargrove, who ended up doing some things for us. This is probably his first breakout game. He has 153 yards rushing and a touchdown. Granted, most of that was probably in the second half, but still. Darius Watts has 6 receptions, 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. Marshall, 733 total yards. 733 total yards. I mean, good Lord. JT Rembert, 1 interception and 1 fumble return for a touchdown for 34 yards. Yancey Satterwhite had 1 interception. Marcus Harrison had 1 fumble return for a touchdown for 11 yards, so 2 defensive touchdowns. It was just an all-around just great performance. I mean, against a really bad team, but still it was an impressive win that you needed to have. And then the last game we'll look at in these next 3 is the week after that, again at home, on the 19th of October against Troy State. This is before that they had changed to Troy. They were just Troy State, and I believe they were independent at this time. And Marshall gets a nice win, 24-7. It was a very rainy, kind of dreary game. First offensive play of the game, matter of fact, one of their receivers, Curtis Jones, goes down with a season-ending injury with an ankle or his leg. It was kind of an ugly scene there. So that was not a good way to start it. But this was going to be kind of a grinder type game because it was just kind of nasty conditions. Leftwich goes 23 out of 35, 275, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Jason Rader, who is from St. Albans, who originally was at, I believe, Georgia, he transfers over to Marshall. He has his first career touchdown catch at Marshall in this game, and Jason Rader ended up having a good career. Watts had 4 catches for 76 yards and a touchdown. Roberto Terrell had 1 more pick. 5 sacks, I think, at least 5 sacks, and they held Troy to 164 total yards. So probably the best defensive game of the year because, Buffalo, they probably played better defensively against Buffalo, but Buffalo's tail was absolutely horrendous. Troy State was not that bad at this time. So probably the best defensive performance of the year there against Troy State. So talk about those games right there, Kent State, Buffalo, and Troy State. What stands out to you?
Well, back to Kent State, Josh Cribbs is a dog, man. I'm telling you,
yep.
He had every single touchdown. He had every point. Every point that Kent State scored in that game was thanks to Josh Cribbs. I mean, the guy was amazing, fantastic kick returner in the NFL, and great for the Cleveland Browns. But even at that, Marshall just had way too many guys, and were able to just pull away from them, no problem. That's and still yet looking at the numbers and whatnot, Leftwich didn't have a great day. I mean, a lot of yards passing, but the 2 interceptions still just kind of struggling right out of the gate just a little bit. And you just mentioned it, he was able to turn that around the very next game. But something that was cool that I know that the documentary definitely went in depth on this particular game too was talking about kicker Curtis Head. He went 4 for 4 in this game, a long of 53 yards. So I mean, not too bad. He's a pretty good kicker for us. And he didn't have to do a whole lot of work though, because more oftentimes than not, Marshall's going to score a touchdown back in these days. But still, a good win. They should have won. Kent State really just wasn't all that great aside from Josh Cribbs. And then, as you said, against Buffalo, just as flattering. I mean, my goodness. somebody should have called the police at halftime because it was just it was bad. It should have been illegal, and it is amazing to think about what else Byron Leftwich could have done if they would have just like let him go. He
Yeah.
might have been a Heisman Trophy finalist just because we would have had 4 more touchdowns. It would have been like over 40 touchdown passes that he threw throughout the entire season. But I understand the sentiment pull him because there's no use of getting him hurt and no use of being able to just run up on another team. But yeah, Buffalo did not stand a chance. I mean, it was just a complete splatter. And now Troy State, that's an interesting game in my opinion because Troy State was not a fantastic football team up to this point. They were like 2-5, I think, coming in. Really unimpressive, but their defense kind of held strong against Marshall. All things considered, whenever you have a Heisman hopeful quarterback, you only, let him have 275 yards passing and 2 touchdowns, which, I mean, that's not a bad day by any means, but the guy was getting close to 400 yards a game passing. So they definitely were able to shut that down a little bit, and were also able to dominate the run game. Brandon Carey led with 68 total yards, and Butchie Wallace only had 14 yards. I mean, that's just not a whole lot. And Leftwich was on the run a lot. I'm looking at his numbers here. He got sacked a few times. He finished with -8 yards rushing. So, that was there was the problem. There was a little bit of issues there with protecting the quarterback and all of that. But still yet, Marshall does get the victory. And the Curtis Jones injury that you mentioned, man, that was tough to watch. I mean, they like showed that thing in slow motion a couple of times, and I was like, oh goodness, because you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that did end his season. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, it did.
Yeah, I thought so. So sad there. You lost a weapon. Curtis Jones he's a good player for us. He made some noise, but Marshall still got the win, 24-7. And improved to 5-1. They just need one more win for a bowl eligibility, and then they're going to be heading up north to a game. This next game that, in all reality, is what I think is a turning point for this team in the entire season. So let's talk a little bit about that game up at Central Michigan.
Yeah, it was definitely a crazy game that was definitely a turning point. I would agree with that sentiment there for sure. And as far as Troy State, talked about, them getting a lot of pressure. Well, if you got the Marcus Ware, you're going to get pressure. I mean, what else? What more needs to? I think they even had OCU Manora at that. I mean, are you NFL All Pros? You got on that D line. I mean, insane. So yeah, they didn't have a whole lot else, but they had 2 of the best defensive players in college football. So that probably had a lot to do with that. But looking at this Central Michigan game a little bit, this was on October the 26th. They have to go all the way up to Mount Pleasant, Michigan to play Central Michigan. And it was a wild game, and it was not the most impressive game that you've ever seen for sure. Marshall does get the win 23-18, but boy, they had to sweat it out big time. Marshall starts well in this game. They get up 20-0. And then, Central just kept slowly chipping away. It was like 20-9 at the half, and Marshall kept playing sloppy and penalties and turnovers and all kinds of stuff. It just was not a very good performance. And then Central gets it all the way down. They're down 5, and they have the ball, and they're driving. And it took a Marshall 4th down stop to get, to win that game. It was way closer than it should have been for sure. Leftwich goes 29 out of 42 for 374 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Marriott, Davis, and Watts all top 100 receiving yards. I mean, that is just lethal. If you've got 3 guys that can go over 100 yards in the same game, a receiver, big time. Watts and Marriott both had a touchdown each. But again, the run defense was an issue again. Central Michigan's running back Terrence Jackson rushes for 112 yards and a touchdown. So their run defense was definitely a liability. I would say at this point it really had only cost them in 1 game, but it was starting to definitely rear its ugly head a lot more. Yancey Satterwhite had an interception. He was a good player, really good defensive back for us. So they squeaked that one out for sure. I mean, they were lucky. And you heard a lot about that after the game because they were very unhappy. Leftwich were ripping them after the game. That they showed that very well on the DVD, and it was awesome to hear. Like you don't accept anything less at Marshall. That's what the mindset should be. So then the next game after that, you've got, this is probably one of the most infamous games in Marshall football history. On November the 2nd, you go on the road at Akron, who at this point was a pretty bad team. I mean, they were not a good team at all. And this is the game where everything changed for Marshall and Byron Leftwich himself. Of course, this is the game where he gets injured towards the end of the first quarter, early second. I can't remember exactly when it was, but he goes down with a shin injury. And everything was just different from that point. They were broke at that point as a team. That completely shot everything that they had going. Their composure was gone. It was just not good. And Marshall loses this game 34-20 to Akron, who was at this point was a 1-win team. I mean, it was just inexplicable. But their mindset and their head was not right after Leftwich goes down. And, of course, we've seen we've heard the stories, we've seen the play of him getting carried down the field later in the game by his linemen and, him leaving the game to get x-rays, coming back in the game. I mean, just historic, legendary stuff that no one will ever forget. And admirably, he goes 26 out of 38 for 307 yards in this game, did not have a touchdown, had one interception. But, man, the fact that he was able to play at all in this game, given the circumstances after he got hurt, is nothing short of miraculous. It just was. Akron, their running back, Bobby Hendry, rushes for 120 yards. Again, they give up another 100-yard rusher. It's kind of hilarious because Marshall has 420 total yards. Akron has 288. And you would think at that point, Marshall's probably left this game for sure. But the difference in the game is Marshall has 7 turnovers. 7 turnovers. Akron has 1. I mean, you don't have to even have 300 yards of total offense if you're getting 7 turnovers. I mean, that is unbelievable. And the fact that they were only able to win by 14 when the other team gave you 7 turnovers, that shows how bad Akron was. I mean, let's just call it like it is. Just a horrendous, performance. And like you kind of understand it, but man, it came at a very crucial time because you got a game coming up next, which one of the more infamous, memorable games in Marshall football history, on November the 12th at home on a Tuesday night against Miami of Ohio, who at this point, Miami was the team in the driver's seat to win the MAC East. And if they beat Marshall, it's as good as theirs. And, you got Stan Hill having to make his first career start, and it was dramatic. It was wild. It was a great game. Marshall really got up on them pretty good, 17-3. But then Miami countered. It was 17-all going in at the half. You had Ben Roethlisberger as a junior that year for Miami. What a game he had. What a career he had. And it goes back and forth. Miami kind of takes the lead, kind of takes control there towards the end of the fourth quarter. They're up by 5. But then Stan Hill, like we talked about on here, he has that memorable 1-yard touchdown run that gives him the win, ultimately gives him the win in the last few seconds. 36-34, Marshall wins. Stan Hill goes 25 out of 39, 292 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks. But, I mean, that was a phenomenal performance given the fact that that was his first college start in a game of that magnitude where you cannot afford a loss. You have to win. And then Darius Watts has one of, if not the best game he ever had at Marshall. 9 receptions, 149 yards, 3 touchdowns. Absolute monster. I mean, absolute monster. Orlando Washington, the defensive lineman that we had, it was really good. He has an interception early in the game. He picks off Roethlisberger, and that sets up Marshall real nice. Like I said, game-winning 1-yard touchdown in the final seconds from Stan Hill. Just a memorable game. And, of course, that's the game where the Miami coach punched a Marshall fan after the game, and that was on the broadcast. It's very evident. You can see it you go on YouTube and probably find it real quick. And the other coaches, other coach trashing the press box, and this was just complete and utter madness from start to finish. So insane game that Marshall had to have. So talk about those last 3 games: Central Michigan, Akron, and Miami, because boy, you got some highs and you got some lows out of those 3.
I would say the most exciting part of the entire year was that 3-game stretch. And I mentioned it, it's a turning point moment for Marshall was that Central Michigan game. I say that it was the beginning of a turning point moment, I think, because it's very, like you mentioned, very well documented. Byron Leftwich, Bob Pruitt doesn't even say like hardly anything in the locker room after this game is done. Marshall struggled all game long with stopping them. And he gets up, man, and like for the next 30 minutes, he just rips into the entire team. I mean, I'm just talking about cussing and just mad and like, we don't do this. We got to stop making all these mistakes. And I mean, just everything you could ever think about. So in that moment, I think that you see that there is a desire, the heart of Byron Leftwich as a leader of the team. He's not willing to put up with just so-so performances. He's not willing to put up with just so-so as far as just going out there and playing the game. This is Marshall. This is not just some random university. This is a place where we are striving for excellence. And then that very next game, you don't just see the words of Byron Leftwich, but now you see the actual, like, hey, I'm following through with my actions and my toughness and my desire just to win for this university. Him going down, and you could remember this, and we all got to see it there. And you can even YouTube it. It's on YouTube. This particular portion of the documentary is on YouTube. He goes to the hospital like at halftime and gets looked at, and they're like, well, it's not good, but you can't do anything worse to it, so you can go back out. And so he does. He comes back. Byron Leftwich out here like on a broken shin, can't walk, but he's just hobbling around. He's throwing dots, literally, just unbelievable. And, it was too little too late, and he was definitely hurt. He wasn't the same player. He made a couple plays, but he couldn't throw as accurately because, again, you need both your feet if you're a quarterback and trying to throw the ball, consistently that way. But I think that is the moment where the team kind of understood something about each other and really just what it meant to be a Marshall football player is that, man, this is a big deal. Like, our leader is willing to put up, give everything up, his NFL career, his Heisman Trophy candidacy, everything. Why? So that he can help his brothers win a game. And that moment, wherever the two linemen pick him up on their shoulders, I think it was Steve Sculio and somebody else. I can't remember the other lineman who picked Byron up and brought him down the field. Man, that is an image that has honestly become legendary and synonymous with college football of what it means to be a college football player and a college football fan. Like, this is not the NFL, man, and I say that in a good way. This is not a bunch of money-hungry guys wanting to make a name for themselves and all of that. No, these are guys who are putting a university and a city on their back, and they are desiring to do all that they can to win games for those who are around them, the one common goal. And there was never a moment ever in Marshall football history that implemented that overall mentality more so than whenever Byron Leftwich was carried down the field in that moment. Did they win the game? No, they didn't. Should they have won the game? Absolutely, they should have. Akron was a terrible team outside of Charlie Fry, who would eventually in 2004 become the MAC Player of the Year, but he wasn't that year. But they should have won the game. But with everything that took place, it wasn't in the cards. So that sets up one of the most dramatic games in Marshall football history, because the winner of this game is winning the MAC East. I mean, they just are. Like, it's come down. It's clear there's been a complete divide on who is the best in each division. And so the winner of this game, as long as they don't lay an egg in the rest of the season, they're going to be in the MAC championship. And this is a Miami, Ohio team that, honestly, good team. They came in at the time with 7 wins, 3 losses. And Ben Roethlisberger is their quarterback. I mean, big Ben Roethlisberger that would go on to be a Pittsburgh Steeler and also MAC Player of the Year the very next season. They actually win the MAC with Miami, Ohio the next season. So this is a really good team. And you've got a backup quarterback in Stan Hill that, had seen some, games here and there, but we didn't really know if he was going to be the next guy or not. We were hopeful. We really hoped that he would, and we had heard good things about him, but we didn't know for sure. and he comes out and has a legendary performance. As you mentioned, 4 touchdowns total, and I mean, just unbelievable stuff, man. He didn't try and reinvent the wheel. He didn't have to step up and make these like gigantic earth-shattering plays. He had a lot of really good guys around him that helped him out. But that last touchdown that he scored, that bootleg out, jumped over into the end zone, touchdown, man. Just an image that if you're a real Marshall fan, you're never going to forget from a night that it was one of the best nights of Marshall football because the deck was stacked against us. It looked like Marshall was not going to win this game. And really, on paper, knowing that the other quarterback on the other side of the field was Ben Roethlisberger, man, we shouldn't have won the game. But they found a way as a team to come together. And that brings me back to the 2 games before that. Central Michigan, Byron Leftwich set the foundation. Hey, I mean this. Like, we're in this together. We got to stop making these mistakes. Akron, hey, I mean this. Like, I'm willing to put my literal career on the line just for this game against Akron. And so now that Byron's not able to play, the team is coming together. They've gelled, and they picked up the slack. Even though that Byron wasn't out there, they just got it together, and they were able to have the most complete game of the entire season, winning in dramatic fashion against a huge rival in Miami, Ohio. And as you mentioned, just the aftermath of the game was legendary stuff. I mean, the greatest meme of all time is that coach getting arrested, man. It is so amazing. I will use that until I die. Like, I just love that thing. And whenever Miami came and played basketball this last year, the undefeated team, that in the student section, they had that picture cut out. Yeah. And we're like showing it during whenever Miami was shooting free throws and stuff. So awesome stuff, legendary moments. And honestly, that game is one of my favorite games ever in Marshall football history. Just a really awesome night.
Oh man, for sure. And if you were, if you recall, they get that 1-yard touchdown run from Stan Hill because they had it 4th down, and they had in Marshall third. There was an incomplete pass, but they called pass interference on Miami of Ohio. And if you remember, I don't know if you might not even remember it, but I used to have the newspaper, the picture on my wall in my room of this is an excellent shot that proved without a shadow of a doubt that was pass interference. That corner has a big old tug of jersey in the back, and you can see it clear as day. And it's like I had that up on my wall in my room. I mean, it was I don't know. I always did that kind of stuff. But I mean, it was clear as day. And like I remember on the broadcast, they were a little more skeptical that was a pass interference. It was. If you look at it, it was definitely a pass interference. But I think those last 3 games are like perfect microcosms of like what college football should be. Because you've got the Central Michigan game where you win, but you don't play very well. Byron Leftwich, he's a leader. He's holding his team accountable. Other guys, they're holding each other accountable. You got the Akron game. You're putting it all on the line for your team, for your school to win the game. It doesn't matter what your potential and your future is. His future was bright. His future had a lot of dollar signs in it. He didn't care. He was putting Marshall first because that's how much it mattered to him. And then you've got the Miami of Ohio game where it's next man up. I mean, these are all college football. These are all life lessons. It's right there. The proof's in the pudding. Those 3 games right there. It does not get a whole lot better than that as far as this is what college football is all about. Those 3 games right there. Ups, downs, and everything in between. So we've got 4 games left to talk about. I'm just going to break them into 2s. We've been doing 3s, but these are going to do 2s for obvious math reasons. But the next game, you go on the road on November 23rd at Ohio, who obviously historic rival, Marshall's most played team ever, battled for the bell. And Ohio wasn't a very good team this year, but man, they gave Marshall a heck of a performance. They gave him a heck of a game. And if Marshall wins this game, which ultimately that they did, then they would have won the MAC East for sure. So, even though they had beaten Miami, they still needed to at least win this game. And Marshall wins 24-21, and Ohio had a chance It was a long field goal, keep in mind, but they had a chance to tie the game in the last 2 seconds, and they missed a field goal. So very interesting game. Byron and Stan Hill both trade, starting jobs basically in this game. They both play. Leftwich still was far from 100%. But even at that, he goes 19 for 29, 219 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, and that's at, 50%. I mean, I don't know what he was at that point. Not 100, even close to 100. And Stan Hill played quite a bit. Butchie Wallace has a big game, 131 yards and 1 touchdown. That really helped. Denaro Marriott had 6 receptions for $111 and 1 touchdown. And like I said, Ohio misses the game-time field goal late that would have tied it and sent it to overtime. So very good win there. That was the MAC East Division clincher for sure. So that was great to see. And then post game, they also accepted an invitation to play in the GMAC Bowl again after that game. So really, really good night overall for Marshall. And then their last regular season game of the year was November the 30th at home against Ball State. This was senior day. A lot of good seniors that got their last game, regular season game at the Joan. Byron Leftwich, number of other guys. I mean, but he's obviously the headliner. Marshall wins 38-14. Really no question about it. Ball State was decent that year, but Marshall really handles them from the start. No question about it. Byron goes 35 out of 42 for 401 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. So he was back to himself at that point. He still wasn't healthy, but he was back to himself for the first time in a while. So great to see. Brandon Carey, 101 yards rushing, also 7 receptions. He was a very good all-purpose back. Josh Davis, 8 catches, 128 yards. Denaro Marriott, 10 catches, 129 yards. Watts, 7 catches, 69 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I mean, our receivers were absolutely just filthy that year. Absolutely filthy. Willie Smith, Terrence Tarpley, Charlie Tynes all get 1 interception defensively. So, they were all over the place. They were all over the place in this one. And that set the stage for the next game, which we're going to get to here in a minute, the MAC championship game. We will look into that, but talk about those last 2 regular season games there at Ohio and home against Ball State.
Yeah, against Ohio, that's a really interesting dynamic for a couple reasons. Number one, Marshall's always had a tough time playing on the road in Athens. I just don't know why. It's just always that way. It's a great rivalry. I wish that we would play each other more in football than what we already do. I know that we're scheduled in the future, but still yet, splitting time with him and Stan Hill. Stan Hill would basically come in, just hand the ball off more oftentimes than not, just a couple of really actual attempts in passing. But as you said, Byron Leftwich at 50% was enough to get this win, and pretty impressive stuff. And still, with the Battle of the Bell came back home to Huntington, so that's great. And then the next game, honestly, is one that is kind of shocking to me. Ball State, like you said, was a decent team. They actually finished 6-6. They had a winning record going in, 6-5, and they're not terrible. But here, Byron Leftwich was still basically playing on one leg, maybe at 55 to 60% this week, threw for like 401 yards. Like, that's just unbelievable stuff. And I guess there must have not been a whole lot of pass rush, number one. Number two, I guess some defensive backs down at Ball State just weren't that good either, because they got carved up. Brandon Carey had another great game, 101 yards rushing. So, overall, that was a great way to put a bow on the season, a season that was weird. Again, it's my favorite season, and it was just so unique because you lose that game to Virginia Tech, which, is not the end of the world. Losing to Akron is like catastrophic. But to bounce back from that the way that they did and finish out the year with a really severely injured quarterback, it's just unbelievable stuff, man. And that's what it just means to be a Marshall football player and a football team here in Huntington. I mean, that's the embodiment of it. That's what our fan base is expecting. Yeah, there's going to be adversity. Yes, there's going to be problems. Yes, not everything will be perfect, but how you respond to that and how you go forward in the middle of that adversity, that's what really matters. And so we see that they were able to respond greatly, and now they've set themselves up for really a rematch in a game that last year they fell short to against they're not really like huge rivals, but and we don't hate Toledo. It's not like it's more of a respected rivalry. Like we would meet each other a lot there in these championship moments and big games, and so there's a mutual respect between us and the Rockets, and it set the stage for yet another MAC championship game in Huntington. And so let's go ahead and let's talk about what exactly took place in that championship game.
Oh man, it's a big one. I mean, it was huge game, and I love that your sentiment about just all the adversity that they overcame that year. To get through what they made it through, and all the deal. Just major stuff that went against them, and they still have a 9-2 regular season. Left, which is still he at 50%. I mean, I remember reading a quote that Pruitt said. He said, on one leg, he's better than everybody else in the country. And I was like, yes, I mean, you could definitely make that argument. He was even on one leg. I mean, the guy was still throwing for 400 yards. I mean, it's pretty special. But yeah, so now we got to switch gears to the biggest game of the year. Definitely, no question, ends up being the biggest game of the year. MAC championship game at home. The year before it was on the road. This year it's back at the Joan. On December 7th, they host Toledo, the West Division champion. And this year, there's a lot of question whether or not it was going to be Northern Illinois or Toledo, because Northern Illinois actually was a ranked team for parts of this season. They were a very good team, but Toledo I believe they beat them head-to-head. So I think that's what put Toledo in the game instead of Northern Illinois. But either way, two very good teams. Toledo was a 9-win team, so nothing to sneeze at all. What a game this was. Absolutely unbelievable. Marshall gets you talk about drama, a lot of drama this year. Well, this one was dramatic right here. 49-45, Marshall wins over Toledo. And I wasn't at this game, but I have such vivid core memories, like I've talked about on here before, of me watching this game with my grandparents and parents and all that. Like this is like core memories, like for sure. And I just still can see it in my head and I even remember some of the dialogue, that was going on. So it was that cool. But this was an amazing game. Byron Leftwich goes 32 out of 42 for 404 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception in a championship game scenario. Far from 100% still. Just pretty miraculous stuff. It really is. This game had a lot of offense, a lot of numbers, a lot of eye-popping stuff. Darius Watts, 9 receptions for 135 yards and 2 touchdowns. Denaro Marriott, 7 receptions, 87 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then on the other side for Toledo, they had a heck of a running back at this time, Trinity Dawson, who rushed for 130 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. I mean, he was unstoppable for the majority of this game. Roberto Terrell had an interception from Marshall. Duran Smith had a fumble return for a touchdown in the second quarter, 36 yards. I still remember watching that play vividly when I was 8. So very, very cool stuff. I mean, and then obviously at the very end, Marshall's down. They're down 45-42 in the last minute of the game. Leftwich hits that big dig over the middle to Watts, and with 40 seconds to go or whatever it was, Marshall ends up getting the win there. He does the guns in the holster, just iconic. Just does not get any more iconic than that. I mean, just one of the best, definitely one of the best moments in Marshall football history, in my opinion. One of the best wins, just one of the best everything. So they get the MAC back, and they lost it the year before when they really should have won the game, but they just couldn't hold on. This year they get it back. All is well. At this point, Marshall's MAC champions again. All is well. And as I mentioned earlier, they get another bid into the GMAC Bowl, and obviously the year before that has had that all-time dramatic win over East Carolina. Well, this year it would not come down to that because Marshall absolutely handled business against Louisville. This was when Louisville was still in Conference USA. This was on December the 18th, and Marshall gets a 38-15 win. It was 38-7 until the last couple minutes. Marshall had it completely in the bag for the majority. This was a pretty hyped matchup of quarterbacks because you had Leftwich, and then Louisville had a guy named Dave Ragone who was very good at that point. Louisville actually that season, I think that they beat Florida State that season. So Louisville was a good team. They were inconsistent, but they had a lot of potential. Leftwich definitely outshines Ragone for sure. Wasn't his best day, honestly, for Byron. It was not his best day. And if you could tell watching the game that he could not move very well, he probably actually had regressed a little bit physically from the last couple games because he was really hobbling around out there. He goes 22 of 44 for 249 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. So, I mean, for most quarterbacks, they would take that in a heartbeat. But for him, that was a little bit of an off game. But he really was struggling mobility-wise for sure. Denaro Marriott has 10 receptions for 137 yards and 2 touchdowns. Yancey Satterwhite had an interception. Jonathan Goddard had a fumble recovery. And this is also the game where the news started breaking that Louisville's head coach, John L. Smith, was going to be leaving for Michigan State. Like during this game, that's when that came out. So obviously, I don't think Louisville was probably in the best headspace because there's no doubt that got to them, that he was going to be leaving. And he ended up leaving, taking the Michigan State job. So really weird. I mean, you talk about a lot of weird stuff this season. This is just another one of those instances. And this wasn't even on Marshall's end. This is Louisville's end. Just weird stuff. Lots of weird stuff. And with that game, Marshall finishes 11-2 overall. They finish number 24 in the final AP poll, number 19 in the final coaches poll. Leftwich, unfortunately, does not get an invite to New York for the Heisman, but he does finish 6th in the Heisman Trophy voting. Nothing to sneeze at, and I think it's very safe to say that if he does not get hurt in that Akron game, he's easily there. I don't think there's any question about it. But despite that, he still had an excellent season. He goes, I'm going to read some of his stats real quick. 331 for 491, 67.4% completion, 4,268 yards, 30 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and a 156.5 quarterback rating. That's Heisman caliber. There's no question about it. I'll read over some more stats and numbers here in a minute, but talk about those last 2 games because this is what Marshall football. This is what they're built for right here, playing for championships. You got a MAC championship game and you got a bowl game. So don't get a whole lot better, bigger than that. So talk about those last 2 games.
Yeah, you're right about it. I mean, that's why we play. That's why we have a team. That's what this university is all about, playing for championships. And so, I mean, like you mentioned, it was a dramatic back and forth game, really, really good game against Toledo there. And I think that something that we don't talk nearly as much about as fans is how good Darius Watts was. Like, for as good as Byron Leftwich was, man, Darius Watts made his life really easy. I'm just looking at his career stats here.
He's top 5 all time, in my opinion.
48 career games at Marshall, 272 receptions, 4,031 total receiving yards, and 47 touchdowns. It's Randy Moss came to Marshall. He was here. But I'm going to be honest with you. If it wasn't for Randy, I have a tough time not believing that Darius Watts wasn't the best receiver that we've ever seen in all of Marshall football history here. The guy was fast. He was big. He could jump over you and make some spectacular catches. And in that game against Toledo in the MAC championship, he really shined. And that was arguably, you mentioned that he had a really good game earlier in the season. This one right here also would be up there with one of the best games that he ever had in his entire career. And he definitely is an all-timer. And somebody I really don't think that we give nearly as enough credit that we should and that he ought to be able to get, because what he did was just so special. But Marshall gets the victory, 49-45, a classic game. And then, like you said, they move on to Louisville. Louisville's they're not, the powerhouse of Louisville that we would know today. Back in these days, I think they're still in the Conference USA at this moment, if I'm not mistaken. And so, they're a good team, but not a fantastic team. But still yet, they were bigger than Marshall. But Marshall was just – you weren't going to beat Marshall that year, man. I mean, all the adversity that they had gone through and the bouncing back and the season shifting, that game was theirs. And yet again, another GMAC Bowl resides in Huntington after a fantastic year. Now, You mentioned this a moment ago too, and I'm just going to be honest. I to this day don't understand how Byron Leftwich does not get an invitation to New York City to be a Heisman finalist.
Yeah.
What does the Heisman finalist really embody? What does it encompass? It's yes a football award, but I think something too that many Heisman Trophy voters would take into consideration is the character of the individual. So yes, there's outliers to that. You have a Johnny Football who just partied all the time and was so good at football that there was no denying him. Baker Mayfield was the same type of deal at that time in his career, and he's calmed down a lot now that he's professional. But Byron Leftwich, man, he had the statistics that were good enough to be a Heisman finalist, plus the adversity that the guy went through and the overall stuff that he was able to overcome. And just looking at these finalists, I mean Carson Palmer ends up winning the Heisman Trophy, very well deserved, great season. Brad Banks also had a great season for Iowa, but then everybody else, Penn State running back Larry Johnson was great. Was he better than Byron Leftwich? I don't know. Willis McGahee, fantastic player, all-time player at Miami. Did he deserve over Byron Leftwich? I don't know. And the one that really got me is Ken Dorsey, the quarterback at Miami. Again, good quarterback, but he was not better than Byron Leftwich. I'll just go ahead and tell it like it is. Like, he was not somebody that was better. And I don't understand to this day why he did not get that invitation. I think he earned it. I think he deserved it. His story alone, plus the statistics that backed him up, made him worthy. And I think that was a huge miss by those that made that decision. But still yet, can't really complain a whole lot. 2-loss season, you're going to always take that. MAC championship, you're going to always take that. GMAC Bowl victory, you're always going to take that. And Byron always made it clear that, I remember him vividly saying, who cares about the Heisman? I don't care about no Heisman Trophy. And he proved that. I mean, if there's ever anybody that was able to kind of put into action what he put into words, it was Byron Leftwich, because it was clear as day that the Heisman Trophy was not his motivation to play football. He loved football. He loved Marshall. He loved his brothers that were around him, and he wanted to do all that he could to win for this university. And when you put all of that together, I think it's easy for anybody that's listening to understand how, just enamored somebody like me, young at the time, just became with Marshall football, because this was a team that was so easily I just easily fell in love with them. They were a team that played together, a team that had adversity, a team that went through a lot, but also a team that came together when it mattered the most, picked up the slack from those that were not performing at the highest of levels, and made a fantastic season out of what easily could have been a total disaster and train wreck. So when I look back at 2002, man, it is the most fond memories that I've ever have of any season. A lot of it's nostalgia, sure, but even though this is a retrospective of that season, looking at it all, this was just a really good football team. Really, really good, and one of the best that we've ever seen in Marshall history.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because, we've talked a lot about, certain guys and certain stats, and obviously a lot about Leftwich, but this was a great team. Like, you don't go through all that they went through this year. You don't go, win a championship and win a bowl game and do all the things that they did if you don't have a great overall team. And back to your point a little bit about the Heisman. Yeah, I get the reasoning, because, even back then, even though Leftwich was a national darling, like, for sure. Everybody loved him. Everybody did. But even back in those days, if you're a mid-major, it's harder. They push the goalpost back on mid-majors. They always have. They always will. So if that had been one of those other guys that made it to the Heisman, if they had an injury like that, and their numbers kind of slightly digressed, they probably would have still made it. But because it was Leftwich at Marshall, he didn't make it. But I'll tell you this much. Talk about Ken Dorsey, and yeah, he was a good player for Miami. But I would almost bet you anything that I have in my wallet that if you put Byron Leftwich on that Miami team that year, they don't lose to Ohio State in that championship game. They don't lose to them.
They win by 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, right. They win, and they're the national champions undefeated. I mean, that Miami roster, one of the greatest rosters ever assembled in college football. But Ken Dorsey was not a superstar quarterback. Byron Leftwich was. So that's neither here nor there. You're not going to know any difference now. But, yeah, looking at a few of these numbers, some of these guys' individual performances and things throughout the 2002 season, some of the all MAC honorees and different stuff like that. Looking at Josh Davis's numbers, man, you want to talk about, we talked a lot about Watts being a superstar. Josh Davis was right neck and neck, absolutely neck and neck. 75 receptions, 1,191 yards and 5 touchdowns, almost 1,200 yards for Josh Davis. And this is a guy that was a freshman All-American the year before. So superstar, man. I mean, we were superstar. Denaro Marriott, one of the most underrated, if not the most underrated receiver in Marshall football history. He goes 86 receptions for the year, 993 yards and 8 touchdowns. He's 7 yards away from 1,000 yards himself. And then, you look at Watts, of course, all-timer. He's got 71 receptions for 1,030 yards, 12 touchdowns. I mean, you have 3 receivers that one guy was 7 yards short of 3 receivers going over 1,000 yards in one season. That is unheard of. That just does not happen. Absolutely does not happen. That's the best core of receivers in Marshall football history, in my opinion. I don't care. I know Randy Moss was there a few years before that, but this core group of receivers is the best that Marshall has ever had, in my opinion. Just the numbers, they're there. The proof is in the pudding. They were superstars. And then some other numbers to look at. Butchie Wallace at running back, they ran the ball. The running game was more complementary to the passing game at this point. They weren't that focused as heavily on it. But Wallace has 614 yards and 7 touchdowns. Brandon Carey has 657 yards and 4 touchdowns, along with 42 receptions for 386 yards and a touchdown. So very good all-purpose back. Butchie Wallace, again, 27 receptions, 212 yards and a touchdown. So these guys could really do some things. Like, they weren't going to go out and rush for 1,500 yards in a season, but they could do a lot of things. And you got 2 guys right there that combine for, what is that, 1,300 yards? I mean, rushing, that'll work. And they're all-purpose guys. They combine for 42 receptions and 27 receptions respectfully. So very underrated, I think, aspect of those teams back in those days was the running back room. That's my opinion there. Marshall ends up with 11 all-MAC honorees. Some guys on the first team. They did not have as many first-team guys as I would have thought. I was a little surprised when I looked this up. First team guy, Steve Shulo, obviously an all-timer at offensive line. Absolutely just a monster. Huge, huge monster of a man there. Darius Watts, duh. I mean, what? Byron Leftwich, duh. And then Curtis Head as a punter gets first team. But that's the only first team guys they had. 4 guys. And I was like, they're the MAC champion. With all that talent, you got 4 first teamers. The math's not math in there. Looking at the second team, Steve Peretta, another great offensive lineman. He was second team. Chris Crocker was second team, all-timer. Torino Brown, second team defensively. Jameis Martin, second team defensively. And Orlando Washington, second team. These are good players, really good players. A lot of these guys had first-team caliber seasons. And then Josh Davis and Duran Smith are honorable mention. I'm just saying, how in the world are you going to put a guy that almost has 1,200 yards receiving an honorable mention? Not even second team. I mean, what are we doing here, Mac? I mean, crazy stuff. And then, of course, Byron Leftwich is the MAC Offensive Player of the Year. He was the MAC Offensive Player of the Year in 2001 as well. So nothing surprising there. So overall, man, this was just a wild season. It really was. And I didn't talk about this with you when we were prepping for this episode, but I figured since this is kind of what we do on most of these episodes anyway, what about a grade for the 2002 season? What would you give this team, this season, this performance as a whole? What are you going to give them?
I gave them an A. Again, losing to Akron, not great, but it's understandable in the moment. You lose your leader, you lose your big playmaker. It's difficult to come back from that. Losing to Virginia Tech, really, I mean, that was a really good Virginia Tech team. I know that Marshall had the hope to be able to go in there and pull an upset and, really prove themselves. They just weren't able to do that because of the run defense. Just all reality. At that time, they just weren't as strong as what they would end up being towards the end of the season. But, everything else considered, just really memorable moments. Entire team, like we mentioned, coming together. All-time names, like you just mentioned, so many of them. Like, we didn't even talk very much about Chris Crocker. We didn't talk very much about Orlando Washington. Like, these are guys that are legends. And so I can't give them anything lower than an A. I won't give them an A plus because, an A plus would have just been an undefeated season. But an A, I think, is definitely very fair for the entire season's grade.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to give them as well. I'll give them an A. If they beat Akron, I even with one loss, I still give them an A plus. If they go 12-1, with one loss to a top 15 Virginia Tech team, yeah, I'm fine with that. But the Akron loss, and there was obviously very understandable circumstances that led to that loss, but because of the loss just to a pretty horrible Akron team, you got to go. I'm just going to give them an A. But I'll tell you what, there's not very many seasons in which they worked harder for an A than this one. This was insane. This season, I feel like we've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes, and man, it's like you don't really put it in perspective. Just all that this season had. You had, before anything even started, you're a top 20 ranked team coming into the first game. You have all this hype. You've got a quarterback that's a surefire Heisman Trophy candidate. You've got all this momentum, all this hype, all this attention, and you live up to it for the most of the year. And then your Mount Rushmore player, Byron Leftwich, gets hurt, and the whole season changes at that point. And you got to really find out what you have as a team, and what kind of guys you've got in in the foxhole with you. You got to figure out what you really have. And man, this team just proved how close and how much that these guys loved each other and worked together and just cared about Marshall and overcame so much adversity and just all these different narratives that are there, and they're factual. This season quite literally is exactly what the prototypical college football team should look like, in my opinion. This season, because it's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's not always going to be perfectly clean. No adversity, no hardships. It's not always going to be that. But how you handle those situations is what makes you a great team and a great player. And I don't think there's ever been a season. Well, I don't know. I take that back. There's one other season, 1971, that tops this as far as overcoming adversity, and that's obvious. But outside of that, this one's up there, probably maybe number 2. It's up there really high. So just historic, really historic stuff. It was special. There's just so many things that are in play here that were special. So before we close it out, you got any last thoughts about this 2002 season before we close it up here?
Well, just going back to everything that we've said, it's just a year that we'll always remember until the day I die. I will remember this season incredibly fondly. And I hope this was something that Pruitt was so good at. It was not just implementing a culture, but establishing the culture for an entire team to get behind. Mm-hmm. And I really think that's what the missing ingredient has been over the last couple of years. Doc he did a decent job, especially with Cato, when you've got that strong leader that gets the troops together. But Marshall has lost that ever since, I think, that Cato departed. We've had good teams, but a lot of it was individuals looking out for themselves. And again, I'm not trying to take shots at anybody, but when Chase Litton was your leader, I think sometimes he could have been more of a me guy. I don't know him. That's just what what I've seen and what I've heard. And over the years, we've seen more and more of that. Even a lot of these superstar players that we saw in the Huff era, in fact, a lot of them were more me guys, and we found that out to be true whenever they all left. So something that has been missing so greatly for a long time was the mentality of the 2002 team, where it's not just about an individual, although there's a lot of individual talent. And it's not just about trying to get to the league, but we're playing college football, guys. I mean, this is the time of our lives. This is moments where you can't get back. These are fun days. These are days where you're going to be telling your grandkids about where, I mean, Byron threw 400 some yards against Kent State or whatever, like those moments are special, and they may not be the most flashy moments in somebody's life. They may not be the greatest and grandiose moments in somebody's life, but they're always going to be moments where they look back and say, man, I dominated that game, or man, our team really came together in that moment. And again, Pruitt was so good at finding guys that bought into the culture, bought into the city of Huntington, and really gelled together and picked each other up when it mattered the most. And I really believe that even though last season here at Marshall wasn't the greatest, going 5-7, it's not ideal and it's not acceptable really at any time. We still saw a shift in culture where there was a more of a mentality of the guys caring more about each other than just chasing a bag or trying to make the most money, and or going to the biggest and latest and greatest opportunity. Because whenever you're able to keep a Toby Payne, whenever Virginia Tech was offering him tons of money, or a Jalen Slappy, whenever people were coming out of everywhere trying to get him to be their guard, or Carlos Del Rio Wilson that had offers from other places, and all of these guys, Adrian Norton, and the list can go on and on. But they've decided to stay. And that shows me that there is a very similar component that what Bob Pruitt and Billy Donovan was able, or not Billy Donovan, Jim Donnan, sorry, were able to establish in their cultures that is now overflowing into the modern day Marshall football culture. And that is really just awesome to see as a fan, because for over a decade, we have been waiting for something similar. And I think we're really close to something special, maybe even as special as the 2002 season.
Yeah, I agree. We're definitely heading in that direction. I have no question about it in my mind. I know we are. And yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky that this was my introduction to Marshall this season. Like, I'm pretty dang lucky for that, because there's not a whole lot of more memorable seasons ever. Like we said before, it wasn't the greatest as far as, they've had some seasons where they won more games, but man, it was legendary and iconic and memorable to a different level that we don't see that often. It just was, and it just, this is what is missing. This is what the bottom line is to me. What is missing in today's college football world and just NCAA athletics world was on full display with this Marshall team in 2002. They embodied everything that's missing in today's landscape. That's just what I feel. And it was special to watch. And I'm glad I was, even at 8 years old, just getting into sports and getting into Marshall, I'm glad I was able to be a part of it. So yeah, this was a fun episode. I was looking forward to talking about this season a lot closer. And I was, looking really much forward to the conversation. So I think it went awesome. Looking forward to whatever we pull out next. Like you said, we're not going to be able to do these as consistently because we've got a lot of stuff coming up. We're going to start getting into football previews and heck, before too long, we'll be doing week 1 preview against Penn State. Man, I mean, we're really getting close. So it's exciting. We got a lot of stuff to talk about coming up. So we'll pull these out of the bag though every once in a while, just when we feel like it and we have some time to do them. But I think this is a very fitting way to start with this whole series of intermediate episodes. I think it's a good way to start. So with that being said, go Herd, and we will catch y'all next time.